Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellowshow. I'm your host, theFellowKGB. You can follow me on Twitter at theFellowKGB. And today, I'm super excited and humbled to have this guest on my show today. He would easily be like my personal 101 of fantasy football analysts, if that was such a thing. He's the co-owner of Football Guys, the host of the On the Couch podcast, and he is Sigmund Bloom. Welcome to the show, Sig.
It's great to be here. I love all of our interactions, and you are an excellent, not just supporter. I see you in the chat room, what we do and how we interact on Twitter, but the fellowship, and this is my first time with the fellowship, I think embodies the good qualities of the fantasy football community. And who would think that fantasy football, of all the social media online communities, that generally, I think we're what, Kyle, like 93% nice to each other.
It's probably like the
96
most positive space on Twitter. Like I tell
right?
people like I got this Twitter and they're like, oh, on Twitter. But I'm like, no, like you got
No.
to understand that this is where good things kind of happen and people are really friendly and just they want to have good conversations. So
Yeah,
that's what we're
exactly.
here for.
And I feel like you and the fellowship and all the energy you all embody really transmits that. So I love any time we get to interact. And I was excited when you asked me to come on and do a show.
I was so nervous to ask you, but I've wanted to do it for a while. I've been a big Football Guys guy for like the last 4 or 5 years. And I don't know, I just figured it was time. And I don't know, I'm so thankful that you're doing this too. You got a Category 4 hurricane kind of coming through your area, and you're still willing to come
In
on the
New
show.
Orleans, they just you look at that as an excuse to have a party, like stock up on beer and
Ah,
have a party.
yeah, let's
Thankfully, though, I mean that's just I think it's an excellent mental health way of coping with the idea of a hurricane bearing down. But yeah, this one we prayers, thoughts out to everybody in Western Louisiana, Lake Charles, and we'll see. You know, I think that everyone, everywhere. I mean,
it's
this is
not
where
done yet. That's what's
we're not.
crazy.
I know we're not gonna. We're not. We're gonna talk about football, but I think everybody everywhere on some level is experiencing some sort of catastrophe. You know, whether it's mental and spiritual and emotional health, whether it's financial, whether it's wildfires. You know, the derecho in the Midwest. Now this hurricane, and the hurricane season's not over, as you said, and Superstorm Sandy. That was like around Halloween, right? So it's a time that I think I guess the positive spin on it, the fellowship, right, is just we all keep each other company and help each other find meaning and purpose in a pretty crazy time.
Yeah, the fact that we can sit down and talk football during all this crazy chaos right now is pretty crazy to me. But we'll get into the football. I don't really have a main topic or script today. I kind of just have a few topics that we'll kind of, I don't know, bounce around. But I want to start the show off talking about drum beats. This is the Cecil Lammy, coin phrase, and it's starting to kind of catch on as a term in the fantasy industry. So I just there's so many names on the drum beat list that I have here. So I just kind of wanted to ask you, like, whose drum beat is getting too loud for you to ignore right now?
Auden Tate. Let's just put that one out there first, right? And I mean, I know that I make my living advising everybody, and the 15th round and on isn't exactly where you win drafts, although it can help. But Auden Tate, I think, is a player that has been overlooked from the moment he fell to the 7th round of the draft. He came out probably too early. That's what happened with Auden Tate. And the other thing with Auden Tate, and we'll see this with Quintez Cephas, player I have a feeling you know his game well, that the 40 time, right? So the NFL sometimes can still be too simplistic about scouting reports. And Auden Tate's 40 time was not fast. I think it was around like 4.7.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we also can see, number one, 40 time doesn't necessarily measure pad speed. And number two, in the speed score, I think Football Outsiders came up with the speed score a long time ago. But the speed score at least reflects this idea that the smaller you are, the more important it is that you're fast. The bigger you are, the less important it is that you're fast. Auden Tate is massive. He might have the biggest wingspan in the league, right? Or at least he has the biggest functional wingspan in the league, because he can actually get to the balls in his catch radius and make these amazing, amazing catches. So he's got game, and he's still developing. Now you have Joe Burrow, and with Burrow, first of all, let me say this on a drum beat, okay? Be excited about the Bengals.
Yes.
Be excited about Joe Burrow, okay? Everything that you could have hoped to hear about Joe Burrow in his first camp, you are hearing. He has that special aura. He is, over the course of training camp, evolving as a player, right? And this has to do with Auden Tate, that he figured out, he said, he figured out if he led Auden Tate, that didn't work. Again, he doesn't have a closing speed, but if he allowed Auden Tate to go up and get the ball, game over. And he was doing it repeatedly at the end of their 7-on-7 drives, red zone drills. That's what you want to hear for Auden Tate. And that could translate to A.J. Green, and that could translate to T. Higgins. But the idea is you're hearing enough repeated positive news about the Burrow to Tate connection that with T. Higgins banged up, with A.J. Green at least returned to practice, light our prayer candle there. But, you know, I think that Auden Tate could be the red zone weapon for this team. If the path to Auden Tate playing time is a John Ross injury and an A.J. Green injury, it's you're almost saying you're more surprised if he doesn't play, right? So, but the drumbeat idea, and thank you for giving Cecil the credit on that, is just that once you hear it from enough different sources and over enough of a span of days, you have to at least be open to things being different than what you expected. And it's better than if you aren't hearing it. I mean, it may not be a positive indicator, but it's certainly not a negative indicator. And this is why, you know, the Ronald Jones stuff earlier this summer, Kyle was like, oh, Bruce Arians has lied about running backs at this point in time, and we don't care until they're playing. But it's better than if you're not hearing any news,
right,
or if you're hearing negative news. And maybe, you know, we have to come up with another term, the opposite of the drum beat. I don't know what that would be. Because a creative person out there can come up with something. Because it is true, and Jason Wood, a true original football guy before I was even a football guy, said if you hear negative news coming from a staff, now that's even more important because of how reluctant they are to say anything negative.
To put out negative news, yeah.
And the beat writers, for that matter, you know. So, I mean, I saw Chris Brown, who's been covering the Bills for the Bills forever, was like locked out because of what he reported on. Because teams are getting touchy. Teams are getting touchy. They're getting touchy about what beat writers say. So, you know, that's even more reason to put weight on the negative news too. But I'm a positive guy.
Yes. And I'm super excited about the Bengals too, because I'm looking at personnel grouping frequencies on Sharp Football's thing right now. And the Bengals ran the most percentage of the 3 wide receiver sets, so they're going to have 3 guys on the field at receiver at all times. So you got to think that Tyler Boyd's going to be kind of roaming the middle of the field, and then take your pick. If it's A.J. Green, John Ross, or T. Higgins, like one of those guys will probably be on the outside. And then I think Auden Tate's going to have a good chance at getting on the field a ton this year. So and the ADP is so cheap right now. So I'm super into Auden Tate. But then I have like a list of other dudes here.
Yes, let's do it.
Whether it's Chris Herndon, Damian Harris, I think I want to hear you talk about Nahim Hines, because he is starting to get too loud for me to ignore. I mean, there's Leviska Chanal, there is Brian Edwards, whether it's Paris Campbell, even Quintez Cephas, Chase Claypool. There's so many names on this list that I've been kind of just, I don't know, it just gets louder and louder and louder. So if any of those guys stick out, I'd like to hear where you're at with those.
Yeah, Herndon, Hines, Harris, Chenault, Edwards. There's one more name in there I'm missing.
I mentioned Paris Campbell. Claypool even.
And Claypool and Cephas. Okay, let's go through these, and I'll try not to belabor it, but I'm a man of too many words. Chris Herndon is a slam dunk right now to take in as your tight end 2, or maybe even your tight end 1 if you decide to wait. He was good as a rookie. Between the suspension injuries, never really came around. You hold your nose. You say, I'm going to take a jet, even though he plays for Adam Gase, because this is a similar script to the Darren Waller script last year, where the wide receivers are decimated by injuries, probably weren't that great to begin with. The chemistry between Darnold and Herndon is there. So that's this, you know, everyone has a favorite. Blake Jarwin, Irv Smith, TJ Hawkinson. But you don't even have to take one of them. Take 2 of them. That can be your plan at tight end. Herndon. You can't ignore this stuff with Herndon. And he looked really good as a rookie. Surprised me. I think that his last year at Miami, he was playing hurt. So just file that away in the back of your mind, too. I think Grant Delpit maybe was playing hurt last year. I was really sad to see him go down. Anyway, Nahim Hines, I've been on from the moment. Well, I mean, before they signed Phillip Rivers. I love Nahim Hines. Nahim Hines is the kind of running back that I will go down with the ship every time. I love the running backs that are quick in a phone booth, that have acceleration, that have speed, that are good pass catchers. Hines has all of these boxes checked. His rookie year, he looked like he was going to be one of the next great pass-catching running backs. Last year with Jacoby Brissett, didn't quite come together. But he always looked like the most explosive player in that offense. Then enter Phillip Rivers. Rivers has never thrown to the running back fewer than 100 times in his career. And even when Brandon Oliver and Donald Brown, damn it Donald, were his running backs, he threw to running backs over 100 times that year. Nahim Hines also is getting all of the positive drumbeat. Zach Kiefer from The Athletic said in his report today that over the course of camp, every day he's seeing Hines all over the place, catching the ball. And now he said very directly, the talk of him having 75 catches maybe isn't so insane. And this is when beat writers, and this is great. I'm not sure how long ago you started playing fantasy and voraciously consuming every bit of news you can, but the beat writers are talking directly to fantasy players now.
Yes, that's like the first time I noticed it. This summer, they're actually like, hey, attention, fantasy owners.
Right. It's great. It's great because, as I was saying the other day, when I was talking to David Dodds, when Cecil and I started the Audible 15 years ago, I would never use the words fantasy football when we were talking to a beat writer because I thought, well, that's like...
It's like a turnoff, yeah.
Nobody cares about fantasy football except for us, and now they know that. Damian Harris had a good camp. Damian Harris is a good all-around running back. Cam Newton is going to improve the quality of the running game, and I'm excited to see Cam Newton, the Patriot, just as an aside. Like, from a reality show NFL point of view, that's must-see TV. But you still have Sony Michel getting back on the field. You still have James White. You still have Rex Burkhead. And as much as Cam Newton will improve the running game efficiency, he will take away rushing touchdowns at the goal line. So Damian Harris, I'm never going to slam anybody for their 17th round pick.
Right.
I'm not going to say, you're crazy. I'm more hesitant on Harris. Leviska, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's like the whole Patriots backfield. It's kind of just this huge moving target. And I think we're going to talk about later about like certain position groupings or teams that you feel confident in. And I don't have any confidence with, guessing that Patriots backfield correctly. So I'm super interested to watch it and see what happens, but I'm kind of staying away at the moment.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when the Patriots were producing league top-end number of touchdowns as an offense, and Tom Brady was the quarterback, so there was no threat of a quarterback taking those touchdowns at the goal line, it was more interesting. I still think the offense is going to be, at best, aspirations, middle of the road in NFL quality. And that could be solely because of Cam Newton and because Josh McDaniels will commit to Cam Newton. It's easy to forget McDaniels when he was running a team and he got to pick his quarterback. Who did he pick? Tim freaking Tebow. So, McDaniels is going to know what to do.
He's got things, yeah.
Yeah, he's going to have a plan, but it might just be resulting in Newton and maybe Edelman, because Edelman and Newton have something going on, but there's a big drop-off in receivers after that, unless you're talking about James White. Okay, the rookies you talked about. There's a lot of them.
Let's start with Leviska Chanal. Yeah. He's been looking really good, and I think he's got an outside chance to finish as the number 2 receiver there. I know DJ Chark's locked in, but DB Westbrook is kind of unappealing to me. I still like Chris Conley's game, but man, they can do so many fun things with Leviska, and they got nothing to lose this year. They got Minshew kind of just throwing it around, and I don't know. I'm starting to think that Leviska is going to be one of the pieces of my draft plan in the double-digit rounds, maybe like 10, 11.
Absolutely. In fact, dare I say, after now that Brandon Ayuk's hurt, after CeeDee Lamb and Jalen Reagor, he's probably 3rd on your rookie wide receiver redraft board. Okay. First, let's talk about Jacksonville in general. Noted, Gardner Minshew looks like he's in shape.
Yes.
Gardner Minshew looks like he took this year as offseason and took it to heart that he's going to actually go into a training camp as an established NFL starting quarterback, which nobody, maybe Mike Leach, but nobody else would have said he was going to be a starting NFL quarterback in his 2nd year, an established starting quarterback, and he looks like he took that to heart. He looks like he took that seriously, although we have to love Minshew for keeping things light. So, you mentioned DJ Chark, and I don't want to gloss over Chark while we're talking about drum beats. He's putting on a show. I mean, if you didn't have all the context of being obsessed with football the way we are, and you just went and watched a Jags practice and you saw DJ Chark.
I want that guy. Yeah.
He's one of the best in the league.
Yep.
Like I'm sure if I could go to other training camps, I wouldn't see someone better than him. So keep that in mind when it's the 5th or 6th round. You're looking at a wide receiver. You really can't go wrong, right? I mean, you're gonna take Metcalf, McLaurin, you take all of these guys. But enter Leviska Chanal. Now, Leviska Chanal actually fits into a theme I was talking about with Chris Herndon. If you watch 2018 Leviska Chanal, you'd say that should be the number 1 receiver in the draft because he's just so physically overwhelming. Like physically, it just looks unfair when you watch this dude. 2019, he was playing hurt. Even when he ran, I don't even remember what he ran at the combine, Kyle. Like 4.5.
It was mid 4.5, yeah.
He's running with a hernia, I mean, look, Leviska Chanal is the guy from this year's very impressive wide receiver class who might be the specimen.
Yes.
Like the guy that is just dealt the hand that is, no matter how he plays it, he's going to win because of the physical tools he has combined with competitive toughness. Now, for fantasy, what we care about is, first of all, as you said, he's going to be this main slot receiver, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And they are showing a great willingness to just line up in the backfield, to give him some jet sweeps, let him do some things, embrace this very unique talent that you have, who maybe isn't the most refined route runner, but even his route running has been impressing. In
the video clip that I saw, he's looking like Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins at the line of scrimmage, and I had to do a double take. It was kind of
that's a bonus.
Yes.
That wasn't part of how we pictured him making an impact in the NFL, at least not early in his career.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really exciting because I think that Chanal is also going to get the opportunity in games where they're losing. Jacksonville, one of the worst teams in the league. So he's going to get that. Chris Godwin made out last year whenever the team was behind by more than a score. And he's going to get a chance to pad his stats during that time. And it's really just injuries. And that was, I think, what made him a 2nd-round pick and not a 1st-round pick was the fear that he's one of those guys because his body is just so – it's like DK Metcalf's body where it's almost hard to comprehend that this is a real human being.
Right.
Those guys are like wound tight. Maybe I don't know, because with the little guys like Marquise Brown, we could say they're like a sports car. I don't know what we would call those guys. But it could be very delicate, the balance of keeping everything. But so far, Chanal is balling out in training camp and staying healthy. And I really wanted to spend a lot of time on him because he's absolutely a priority. Like if you get one thing out of this show, you're listening to it, Leviska Chanal in the late rounds, and let's see what happens. But Brian Edwards is another guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Kyle, I'm sure you saw this because Edwards, there was a day or two that Edwards was like the most talked about player in fantasy.
Trending, yes.
Like, and everybody had their take one way or the other. But if you read, and there's so many great people doing great work, and I suppose in these moments that we're being very sensitive and heartfelt, Kyle. Let's also talk about all the people that are getting laid off in our industry and things like that. It's sad because they're all doing great work, and they're doing great work helping us be smarter and smarter about football. And with Edwards, it was okay. Edwards had a foot issue, surgery, missed the off season, probably going to be a redshirt year. But Edwards showed up with different plans and immediately asserted himself as someone who has to get playing time in this offense. And Edwards has the profile of a guy like he showed up at South Carolina. Was he 18?
Mm-hmm.
And immediately started playing well in the SEC. Mm-hmm. And when you can play as an 18-year-old in the SEC, wow. We're going to take notice.
Yes.
But his career didn't take off to the point where he was an early entrant to the draft. And, he just didn't quite hit that level where he's coming out as a redshirt sophomore or a junior and is one of the top 10 or 15 picks. And then the foot injury knocks him down to the 3rd round. But he very well, again, like Chanal, we could look back and say he should have been a 1st-round pick or he should have been one of the first wide receivers off the board. There's still a lot of complications with the Raiders' passing game because Ruggs is going to play a role, Renfro is going to play a role, Tyrell Williams is going to play through this shoulder, and he played through a shoulder issue at Western Oregon and with the Chargers and produced through it, which is very inconvenient for fantasy, though. And they've got Darren Waller, and Josh Jacobs is supposed to catch 40, 50 balls this year. So that's a little bit more.
The whole Raiders is a moving target that I don't know if I want to throw a dart at, besides if Jacobs falls. But even everything is just so I don't know. It's too crowded and it's too unpredictable. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm super excited to see what Edwards can do. And this is where it's frustrating because, like, preseason would have been so fun this year. You got all these receivers, all these running backs. We got a couple quarterbacks, and now we get to kind of just walk in blind. So this is kind of one of the most difficult draft preps like for a season that I've had to do.
It is, but maybe it just helps us because we don't get thrown off by the 70-yard touchdown in
Yep.
preseason. That makes us change everything. There's been fewer injuries. All the preseason injuries are going to happen in September now. That's going to wreak havoc. With the Raiders, I'll say this: Week 1 against Carolina. So everybody who takes the Raiders is probably going to feel smart after Week 1. But then I believe it's New England, New Orleans, Buffalo. So whatever Raiders you like, and this probably even includes Josh Jacobs. Wait until about Week 5 or Week 6. You can probably buy low on those guys when they get to an easier part of the schedule. Quintez Cephas.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta love this guy, and I've seen this a lot from my writers and draft Twitter that I love. It's almost a discrete category, Kyle. If you're a connoisseur of draft, and draft was maybe my first love in hyper analyzing football.
Mm-hmm.
If we're breaking a player's profile out, we can say any position, but we can take wide receiver. We're talking about route running and hands and ball skills and releases off the line and how do they run after the catch and how are they as a blocker, right? We're going to break up their game into all of these discrete categories. I don't remember when it was, maybe like 5-10 years ago, I had one of those aha moments. And I think that teams got this all along. Let me take a moment, an editorial moment, because you're being very indulgent, allowing me to just go on and on.
Yeah.
NFL teams are better than we think at this stuff, okay? NFL teams have known a lot of things that we come up with as revelations, Oh, the running game doesn't running backs don't matter. It's the quality of the running game that matters. But teams have known that for a long time. That's why running back by committee became a huge trend like 15 years ago. Teams know there's bad teams that operate like any bad organization or business, and we can point to them and say, come on. like your Packers mug there, come on, what are you doing? But for the most part, teams understand these things, and I do think that teams are better than we realize at understanding all of this stuff. So I don't even remember where I went off on that tangent, but I will steer us back to Quintez Cephas because this is a player. It was competitive toughness. Competitive toughness should be part of every draft profile, and I think the NFL knew this, and this is like football guy stuff. Glad he's just one of those guys, John Madden quote or something. But really, no matter how much, and this is the problem with Dante Pettis. This is exactly what Kyle Shanahan was getting after Dante Pettis on, and I loved Dante Pettis as a player, but when it came to his game, he's a finesse player, and unless you have a system and a role that embraces being a finesse player, it's really difficult to be successful in the NFL as a finesse player, unless you're like a kicker or something.
Sure.
So Quintez Cephas is the opposite end of the spectrum, where he's not a burner. Another one like Auden Tate, who didn't have a great 40 time, but at the line for the release, in the route, at the catch point, after the catch, he's a hoss. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when I started digging in on him and looking at I usually watch a player's highlights first to kind of just get the big picture. Like, what does a guy do really well at? And then I'll watch his individual game tapes that stick out. But the first player that came to mind when watching Cephas was like Anquan Boldin.
Yep.
Like, there's so many things that parallel to what Boldin did well. He's just a big bodied receiver. And then when you think about what the Detroit Lions have on contract next year, like, he's the only one almost guaranteed to stick around. So they're going to try to make sure that he gets enough work in rookie season so that he can be, basically secured next year into a starting role. So, I like the fact that he worked out with Marvin Jones Jr. All summer. Jones Jr. had a bunch of good things to say with him. So he's definitely a guy that I don't know if we can use him for redraft this year, but the part of the fantasy and I guess the process that I have is every year, like, you can look back at your notes and see, okay, this guy was sticking up, and then he just picked up where he left off. And then the guy that comes to mind for that would be Raheem Mostert, because I noticed him the last two preseasons, and then last year, as soon as you see something happen, you're more willing to pick that guy up quickly because you've already done the research on it. So Cephas could be one of those dudes that next year we're probably going to be talking a lot more about him.
Absolutely. And if Marvin Jones can't stay healthy, which he hasn't been able to the last couple of years, or if he gets traded midseason,
Amendola can't really even stay healthy, so that could be opening.
Absolutely. absolutely. With Quintez Cephas, it's a name to remember. And I love that you hit the point of, even if these aren't players we're looking at in redraft this year, even if you don't play in dynasty leagues, you should be playing in dynasty leagues. Even if you don't play in dynasty leagues, so you can't benefit from this ahead of the curve intel, massaging your brain so the next time you hear about them, you're more ready to act on that is important. And that act is also important because things change. The range of outcomes in the season is so wide. It's probably going to be even wider this year than it's been before. That you'll have that little alarm, that notification set. Quintez Cephas is going to start next week. Woo! Now your waiver wire priorities get sorted out very, very quickly. So I love that note. And Anquan Baldwin is a great name to bring up with him. And Chase Claypool, and this is one where I hated the pick. I hated the Le'Veon Bell pick too. So I mean, I'm a Western Pennsylvania bred Steelers fan, and I didn't like the pick. I think Chase Claypool is better suited to be an Evan Ingram type, but the Steelers want to make him an outside receiver, and it's working out. And as far as other drum beats from training camp go, I think that we need to look at Ben Roethlisberger as someone who's back. He's back, and maybe even a little better than he was before, because he said that elbow was a problem for 13 or 14 years. So I think we have a Roethlisberger who can create overachievers in this pass offense. Now we expect it to be maybe Juju Smith-Schuster bouncing back, who at least the report today was he's had a very quiet camp.
Yeah, that was kind of alarming.
Yeah, and I mean with Juju, you almost wonder too that the Steelers are in salary cap hell next year before even the 175 floor, because that's another thing to in the background. The NFL salary cap is probably going to stay at best flat, more likely go down. And some of these teams, like the Steelers, like the Saints, that have just been kicking it down the road another year so that they can stay in a Super Bowl window, pain is coming. Lots of pain. And Juju Smith-Schuster just isn't going to remain a Steeler. I mean, it's just I don't know how you make the math work. Cameron Hayward.
Are you mentally prepared for Juju to be elsewhere almost already?
Yeah. Well, look, as a Steelers fan, we've seen Mike Wallace go elsewhere. We've seen Emmanuel Sanders go elsewhere. Going back to like Plaxico Burress, it's just one of those things. The Steelers aren't going to pay that top of market. Yeah, I mean they never were before, but especially now that the wallet is so tight. And I think the Claypool pick was in some ways looking forward to that time without Juju Smith-Schuster. If they're going to try to scrimp and save and keep anybody from the current, and look, there's a lot of guys coming up that are free agents. Bud Dupree, I think Cameron Hayward is the one that they probably would do their best to keep if they can keep just one of them. So anyway, Claypool, what's interesting about Claypool is ever since Plaxico, who played just 1 year with Roethlisberger, just his rookie year, it feels like they've been trying to get that big red zone target, that big downfield target for him. Like the road is littered with Limas Swede and Martavis Bryant, and they gave Justin Hunter a chance. All of these big, fast guys to allow Roethlisberger to do his thing whenever he extends the play. It sounds like there's chemistry there, and that Claypool is really ready to go. I didn't love him as someone against NFL outside corners, but it sounds like he's showing out really well. I wouldn't draft him.
Right.
He may not even be fantasy relevant, because also Eric Ebron's showing out in training camp, and Roethlisberger likes him too. The Ladarius Green redo. So the Steelers might be a pass offense with too many pieces. I mean, Deontay Johnson's cheap enough that I'm not going to talk anyone out taking him 8th, 9th round. And it still converges back at James Conner, that if this is a really good offense, then James Conner is going to be a good pick. And the last one, Paris Campbell, he's just picking up where he left off last year. Last year in camp, he was one of the talks of camp before he got hurt. But here's the thing. Nahim Hines, right? I haven't, Hines, the drumbeat is there, and it fits with Rivers' MO this year, which I think is going to be take care of the ball.
You're not going to see middle of the field, take no risks. I'm not throwing as many interceptions as I've been accustomed to.
It's just like Peyton Manning the year the Broncos won the Super Bowl. Just get the car home without hitting anything. Just pull it in the driveway nice and slow, and everyone's happy, because this team's defense, this team's running game, this team doesn't have to win on Phillip Rivers' arm. I think you're going to see Paris Campbell some weeks break off like a bubble screen for a 70-yard touchdown. I think other weeks you're going to see him touch the ball 3 times for 17 yards. And it's going to be the same thing with Michael Pittman. if there's one constant in the passing game, it'll be T.Y. Hilton. Even Jack Doyle.
Yeah.
Rivers is going to throw a lot to the tight ends, but Trey Burton's having
That's
a good
the
game.
other drumbeat that's been pretty steady lately.
Right?
Yeah.
The drumbeat really spells out the Colts Cowboys Super Bowl. What do you think? Colts Cowboys Super Bowl.
I'd watch it.
Yeah.
It'd be a good one.
I think so. So I mean, I think the Colts are a team that we have to watch out for as a contender to the Chiefs and the Ravens because they're such a complete team now. And I just hope we get to see those three teams, Colts, Ravens, Chiefs, like at least two matchups out of those three in the playoffs.
Okay, cool. So that's that's pretty much all the buzz people that I had on my list. But then one of the comments here in the box over on the side is asking about Joe Mixon. I'm sure you saw the Joe Mixon stuff today. He's not at practice, but he was, I guess he missed practice on Monday with an injury, and then he's just not there. So I don't know what your first couple takes are on that.
So there's a couple of things that we're watching here, and I don't want to tell people to overreact. And Joe Mixon's part of a group of running backs at the end of the first round. You know, you've got Miles Sanders' injury. You've got Joe Mixon now in this issue with missing practice that's kind of mysterious. You've got Josh Jacobs, and you're counting on the Raiders.
Even Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, and Cook. So we're entering into this shadowy time, and we all remember Le'Veon Bell and how that went and how it basically blindsided all of us. I don't know that there was very many people at all saying be worried about Le'Veon Bell because Le'Veon Bell held out. And it always used to be just fade the holdout.
Right.
Yeah, they're going to show up. They're going to play. They can say whatever they want. And Le'Veon Bell was a watershed moment for all of us because Bell held out, showed up, played well. So when he held out the following year, we thought, well, it's just going to follow the same script. And then he misses the whole season. And now we're all very gun-shy about not taking the holdout seriously. Even this offseason, when the Dalvin Cook camp said he's not going to play without a reasonable extension, we were like, ooh.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just showed up at camp. The new CBA makes it very difficult for players to hold out without having serious financial ramifications. But now we have all of these little blips and bloops on the edges, right? Adam Schefter says, oh, I don't know about drafting Dalvin Cook in fantasy leagues because he doesn't have a contract.
That's alarming.
He's going to play, right? Joe Mixon doesn't show up at practice. Chris Godwin even. There was some stuff out of
the Arians quote was really interesting. I don't have.
That's for me to know and you to find out.
Yeah, that's
said
crazy.
Like that. Yeah, and Godwin's been missing practices, and Godwin is going to make about $2 million this year, and he has produced a lot more than $2 million of value for the Bucks, and he will produce a lot more than that. So, all I can say is it may be that for folks drafting and that are just wary of Godwin and Cook and Mixon and just go a different direction. And you should take Henry over Cook anyway, by the way.
Yes.
That they look brilliant because of the new CBA and because of how things are structured. The other thing going on that we can't ignore is the scales tipping where African American men in basketball, as you're wearing your Bucks hat, in baseball, are looking on at what's going on in our country and saying, it's more important right now at this moment for me to use my stature to draw attention to what's happening in our communities than to give folks the circus and bread and circus to keep the trains going and all that. And maybe that starts to weigh in also. We're past the opt-out time. Someone asked me, Kyle, like back in July, what happens if someone decides to opt out after the deadline? And I don't really have a good answer.
Oh.
I don't really have a good answer for that, but it's a free country, as they say, and any player who decides, I don't want to play this year.
They could walk. There's got to be something that they can do.
They can just say, I'm not going to play. I mean, the team can sue them or whatever.
Right. Void contracts, whatever they got to do.
So who knows? You know, there's those internal scales for everybody at every decision that you're making. So I think you're right to say this is a developing situation with Godwin, with Cook, with Mixon, that we have to watch. I mean, there's other names like Alvin Kamara, I think. I don't expect there to be problems with Kamara. There's no sign of that, but he's another one. Aaron Jones, that are going into a season.
James Conner's also on the contract year, too. I know a lot of people don't really talk about that, but that's an extra motivator.
Yes, another player that won't be a Steeler next year. Anyway, there's another one for the list. So it is absolutely something to watch, and even just looking for the slightest hint of the direction these situations are going can give us that advantage. So I think it's a great point that Sir Jesse, GM, brought up in the chat, and I'm glad he gave us an opportunity to address it.
Yeah, and then I guess midway through that, you mentioned Derrick Henry, and for some reason, my mind just decided to put Derrick Henry as like the thumbnail for this video.
Nice.
So I don't know if you're into Derrick Henry, but I have been slowly changing my stance more positive to take Derrick Henry earlier in PPR. So I was just curious, like, how early is early for Henry in a full PPR league?
I think 3 is not too early.
Ooh, okay. I was thinking 4 or 5 range. Yeah.
I mean, look, 4 or 5 is where you probably like.
That's steady investment. Yeah.
So here's what I'll say. If someone said I drew the number 3 pick and I know that the chalk pick, because it's going to go McCaffrey, Barkley every draft as it should. If somebody said I drew the number 3 pick and I know the chalk pick is Ezekiel Elliott, but I want to take Henry, I'm not going to say you're wrong.
Right.
Likewise, Kamara and PPR will be the chalk pick at 4. I'm not going to say you're wrong to take Henry. 5, I think, is where you take Henry. Like, if you draw 5, just expect that you're going to take Henry. Here's the deal with Henry. He was the number 2 running back after Christian McCaffrey once Ryan Tannehill took over. And it wasn't close. It wasn't like there was someone breathing down his neck. Because we can say that Chris Godwin was the number 2 receiver behind Michael Thomas, but there's a lot bigger
gap. Yeah.
Yeah, the gap between Thomas and Godwin, and the gap between Godwin and number 3, 4, 5, 6, the gap between Thomas and Godwin is really the story there. But there is a gap between Henry and everybody else. So Henry can have some regression and still be the number 2 running back, but we're hearing that maybe he'll catch the ball more. Look, Darrington Evans is just not an experienced running back. I just think there's going to be more situations where.
Do any running backs on their roster have recorded catches? It's like Dalen Dawkins and Senoris Perry. I don't know if any of those guys have any.
They signed Jeremy McNichols. McNichols has been on the field for like a blink or 2, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I don't even know. But the point is, this could really truly be Henry's show. And I also want to say it's great to be in an era in fantasy football where no one talks about the rule of seat 370 anymore. But maybe they should. I mean, if Henry is a bust and just breaks down on the side of the road this year, maybe they'll look back at the rule of seat 370. So I think that Henry is going to be that guy again. And what more does he need to do to prove to us that he can be that guy? So I absolutely endorse that. And he could easily still be that number 2 running back. With Ezekiel Elliott, the reason you want to take Elliott at 3, the reason he's a chalk pick at 3, is the Dallas Cowboys offense could just go bonkers. Just absolutely.
The whole piece, yeah.
Everything.
Everybody could smash.
Right, like 2007 Patriots, 2013 or 2014, whichever year it was with the Broncos. An offense that just creates overachievers everywhere. Everybody exceeds expectations because it's so highly efficient, and they don't have a great defense either. Dallas Rams Week 1 should be fun to watch. And see what we're looking for. But you want to get, let me put it this way, you want to get at least one Cowboy in your draft at some point. CeeDee Lamb,
I think so.
Jarwin,
it's like in pen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess let's talk about the Cowboys a little bit, because I find myself super interested. If I get a top 4 pick, anytime I can get that, I'm taking Ezekiel Elliott. But then the receivers and the tight end are super interesting because I think you almost have to have one of those guys. And I find myself kind of staying away from Cooper at the 3rd round ADP, and Michael Gallup looks so enticing in the 6th round, because I looked at the stat splits and Gallup got more yards per game than, I think he played 14 games and Cooper did play the full 16. But Gallup outproduced him in a yards per game basis. I think the targets were like no different than like maybe like half a target per game. And then just the touchdowns are a little bit different, but I don't know. It feels like in the 6th round, you're getting one of the best pieces in the offense. And I don't know if it's crazy to say that Michael Gallup might be the best receiver in that offense. I think there's still a lot of questions yet. Even CeeDee Lamb can be really impressive in the 8th or 9th round, because he's probably walking into like a 90 to 100 target role right away. And you think about what Randall Cobb did in that role. I think Cobb was like wide receiver 42. I think CeeDee Lamb's going to put a little bit more value into that role. And I think Cobb only scored 3 touchdowns too. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see all 3 Cowboy receivers finish in the top 36. And then you got Blake Jarwin. You got so many targets to worry about. And it already sounds like even the Cowboys defense is letting Blake Jarwin kind of roam free in the middle of the field. And he's starting to capitalize on all his easy assignments. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys pieces?
This is a fun topic. This is a really fun topic this year, and I like it because we're treating players on a offense level, because I think that that's the easiest way to start your fantasy prep, is just highlight the offenses you think have the best chance of being overachievers and underachievers, and move players up and down or make them less or more prioritized just based on that. And as we said, we want some of these Cowboys. Okay, if there's one potential critical point of failure with the Cowboys, it is the offensive line. They did lose Travis Frederick. They were able to get the Wisconsin center in like the 5th round.
Yeah.
And, so that's not bad. But you need Lyle Collins to stay healthy. You need Tyron Smith to stay healthy. Who's the Cowboys swing tackle? I have no idea. I mean, I really don't. I really don't. That's a problem. That's a problem if there's injuries. But saving that, because I feel like I need to get the bad news or the caveat out of the way, this offense is going to be the Ravens might be more difficult to defend. That's it. I don't know what you decide to take away.
Right.
If you put 8 in the box, now you're very much exposed to Blake Jarwin in the middle of the field. So I guess let's handle it this way. Let's go from the 80 backwards in ADP, like the cheapest to the most expensive. Okay. Let's start with Blake Jarwin. Jarwin, only Jared Cook had a higher percentage of targets go for 20-plus yard catches at tight end last year. And Jarwin had about 40 targets last year. Jason Witten's gone. Took 83
It was
targets.
83, yeah.
So even if Jarwin only gets half of those abandoned targets.
That's still 80 targets.
That's still 80 targets, and he's one of the most efficient tight ends in the game. And Mike McCarthy himself said the shortest path to the end zone is the post route. Did you the one that sent me this quote? Someone sent me this quote in Twitter, and I really appreciate that.
Can't recall.
The shortest, but you nod like you heard the quote already. The shortest route to the end zone is the post route. And Blake Jarwin is going to be getting in one-on-one situations with linebackers and safeties, because you cannot devote extra resources to Blake Jarwin.
Nope.
He's athletic. He's coordinated. He got a extension in the offseason from the team. They believe in him. So 80 Blake Jarwin targets from Dak Prescott in this offense is probably worth 100 or 110 from another quarterback. And 100 targets like a magic number for tight ends. If you can get a tight end that gets 100 targets, you've got a good
top 5 tight end. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Blake Jarwin has to be part of that plan. Now, if you tell me, would I want to take Irv Smith instead, but I want to take Chris Herndon instead, or TJ Hawkinson, I'm not going to say you're wrong.
You can nitpick, yeah.
Yeah, they're all good picks. You make a good case for them. Then we move to CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is a baller. CeeDee Lamb is good. He's really, really good at football.
I think it's going to take us 1 week for everyone to be like, holy.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Why did the league let them get him at 17?
Mm-hmm.
Because he can play every position in the offense. He's good after the catch. He's good when the ball's in the air. He's a little bit of an unorthodox route runner, but he understands how to create separation. He understands how to set his guy up and get free. He's a really good football player. And as you said, Randall Cobb in the second half of the year was almost on a 1,000-yard pace anyway. But the second half of the year, so let's step back and tell a little story about the Cowboys offense in 2019. Amari Cooper, in the first half of the year, was on his way to being the number 2 fantasy wide receiver behind only Michael Thomas. He was just devastating. Then the nicks and bumps piled up so that in the second half of the year, he was an underachiever. And that's when Michael Gallup emerged. And Gallup was worth roughly the same, if not more, than Amari Cooper. And I think, going back to your comments, Gallup is maybe the most consistent receiver in this offense. Amari Cooper not as consistent, but a healthy-ish, because remember, Cooper was banged up going into the season. A healthy-ish Cooper was more than worth the third-round pick you have to pay for him in the first half of the year. But are we burying the lead? Is the lead that Amari Cooper is going to get worn down enough? I mean, when has there been a year in Amari Cooper's season, when has there been a season in his career where he played at his top level of football from beginning to end?
It's just been spurts. That's been the whole thing. It's just little bits and pieces. He goes on 3-game runs, and then he'll lay you the 6-point game or the 2.9 or something like that.
Yeah, and then if Dak Prescott's directive is throw to the guy that's open, I mean, well, there's going to be a lot of guys open in this offense.
Yes.
We haven't even mentioned Tony Pollard, another piece. So I think that we could easily see something where Amari Cooper comes out of the gate the hottest, because maybe he gets fewer targets, but more of those become big plays, because how do you defend this offense? And then we shift as the season goes on. But as you said, 3 top 36 receivers. I'll read it this way, Kyle. The last offense to have 3,000-yard receivers, speaking of Anquan Bolden, was the Kurt Warner Cardinals with Preston, Warner to Preston, and Bolden and Fitzgerald. This offense absolutely has a chance to do that.
It checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
And then, so I know you're a big, you love looking at schedules. So I think we can kind of talk about some of the schedules that you like.
Oh, man.
But the Cowboys schedule, it starts off with the Rams, the Falcons, the Seahawks, the Browns, the Giants, the Cardinals, the Redskins, and the Eagles. It's like, that's almost like all bottom half of the league passing defenses. So everything's just lighting up for me where sometimes I'll take Gallup, and if I can't get Gallup, I'll get Lamb. And then I'm almost always just reserving. I have it in pen, basically. I have Blake Jarwin as like my last pick. And especially in your home league, no one's drafting Blake Jarwin. So he's essentially free, and he's set up, I think, to succeed. So yeah, I want to open up though. Like, what schedules have stuck out to you? I know the Chargers have a really interesting schedule, but I don't really know how confident I am in the pieces. And then you already kind of talked about the Raiders. Raiders having a pretty tough schedule to start, but what else is sticking out to you?
Yeah, there's a lot. And I spend a lot of time looking at the schedule at this time of year. And it's a good tiebreaker if you're in between two players in drafts. And this year, more than any, getting off to a hot start in your fantasy league is going to be so important. Getting those wins tucked away. So I think this is a good time you should almost have the week 1 schedule memorized, especially when it comes time to make your late picks and like, I might have to start my number 3 running back or number 4 running back. All right, schedule notes. Let's see if I can hit here. And by the way, on the Cowboys, just to put a bow on it, Dak Prescott. It all intersects at Dak Prescott. And if your plan is I'm going to take Dak Prescott in the 4th or 5th round, that's my quarterback plan. That's a good plan. Schedule notes. Okay, the Giants start with Pittsburgh, Chicago, and San Francisco. P.U.
Yikes. Yes.
Poor Daniel Jones. I mean, seriously, just get him through the first 3 weeks alive. And you're going to start Saquon Barkley. You're going to start Evan Ingram if you draft them. But your Golden Tate, your Sterling Shepard, your Darius Slayton, let's wait. Buy low opportunities. If you do love Daniel Jones, and he did have the same fantasy profiles like Aaron Rodgers last year, and you want to take someone late to pair up with him, you mentioned the Chargers, Tyrod Taylor, Cincinnati, Kansas City, and Carolina to open up. The other interesting twist here is with Mike Williams and this shoulder injury, could keep him out for week 1, maybe not, maybe he isn't himself anyway. A little more encouraged to take Hunter Henry at a slight discount, Keenan Allen at a big discount, Austin Eckler probably at no discount, but they are players that become a little more attractive to get off to a hot start against that early schedule. I want to point out Atlanta's early schedule. I'm not going to tell anybody to take Todd Gurley. Don't take Todd Gurley. But if you do take Todd Gurley, he's going to start out with Seattle, Dallas, Chicago, Green Bay, and Carolina. If we were to say what are the 5 weakest run defenses in the league, probably 3 of them are on that list.
Yeah, Carolina, Green Bay, and maybe
Dallas without Gerald McCoy. Yes. And Seattle. What did Seattle do to upgrade their run defense over the offseason? I mean, they drafted Jordan Brooks in the 1st round, I guess. I don't know. They did get Jamal Adams. So Todd Gurley could easily have like 7 touchdowns in the first 5 games. It wouldn't surprise me. Be ready to sell high. I like Arizona's schedule after the San Francisco, although I don't think we necessarily need to say after San Francisco, because did you see Nick Bosa's already banged up again? They don't have DeForest Buckner. And Arizona played San Fran straight up last year. 2 of the best 10 games of the year last year were the Arizona San Francisco.
Yeah, they ran them to the wire. They took them all the way.
They were fantastic games. And then Arizona gets Washington, Detroit, Carolina, the Jets, and Dallas. Whew. Kyler Murray. Yes. This is going to be a good schedule for him to get going, for DeAndre Hopkins to get going.
Christian Kirk has been kind of popping up on my radar. Really. I was rediving into his game logs and watching some of his things. And I mean, you think about having DeAndre Hopkins on the team now. Like, Kirk was pretty much I don't think defenses are too worried about Larry Fitzgerald anymore. He's still functional, but teams were probably more worried about Christian Kirk beating them. And now they have to put that focus on Hopkins and in containing Murray's with his legs. So Christian Kirk could be running pretty wild and free for a good amount of times this season.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just going to watch to see how the chemistry goes with Kyler Murray and even someone like Dan Arnold, and Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds out of the backfield. So this offense could really click this year. And I know that Cliff Kingsbury. I want to make a Kyler Kingsbury. They're like a unit, faster. and it would make sense that in the second camp, even though it's not a typical camp, now they can do something truer to the pure Cliff Kingsbury offense. A few other schedule notes I'll touch on here. If you like Cam Newton, he starts out with Miami, Seattle, Vegas, and Kansas City. So that's not very daunting. So if there's going to be some hiccups as they get the McDaniels-Newton offense going, and it just doesn't make, like, Kyle, doesn't it just make sense when you clear your mind and you meditate on this, that after a month we're going to be saying, how did they let
Cam Newton? Yes.
How did this happen? He's one of the best. This is where I'm going to do a short rant. I've made this rant 5 or 6 times on my show. You're sick of hearing it, I'm sure. He's one of the best quarterbacks of this era. He's one of the best quarterbacks of this era. How could he sit in free agency for months and then get a league minimum contract? I mean, when Dante Culpepper and Drew Brees were actually affirmatively hurt, Newton was healing, and at a certain point he was healthy. And don't give me this stuff about the injuries, because teams signed and traded for a lot of players that they didn't give a physical to for months during coronavirus. So any team could have signed Cam Newton and said, well, we'll get the physical done, we can get it done, but we're excited to have you. They let one of the best quarterbacks of this era sit in free agency for that long. There's got to be more to the story. And I think the more to the story
is attitude. Is it just how he carries himself? People aren't really fighting to that or willing to take the risk, I guess, with having a player of his I don't want to say ego, but of his stature. That's a lot.
His stature. It's exactly his stature. When Cam Newton comes to a team, that becomes Cam Newton's team.
Right.
And I'm looking at the Bears quarterback competition. I made a joke yesterday on a show I did that was the quarterback competition with the Bears. They want to paint this picture with the movie and the montage, when the music gets going and they start making it better and getting a little better each time. No, if you're watching the Bears quarterback competition, they're still missing. It's still off. Everybody is still kind of walking around with slumped shoulders. I guess this is going to be our offense this year.
And now David Montgomery is not looking very good. I was a big fan of Allen Robinson in the 3rd round, but even then, I'm starting to have my doubts on putting any of my assets into the Bears. Even Tariq Cohen. I think Cohen's kind of interesting because he's a little bit cheaper in a PPR. He's kind of like the Nahim Hines type guy that you can kind of just whip out there on a bye week or just when the matchup is good. But I can't really invest in the Bears at the moment right now.
This is exactly what we were talking about earlier with the offense level take, right? The Bears offense, it seems impossible for it to produce an overachiever this year.
Right.
And look, we talked about Juju, we talked about Allen Robinson. That wide receiver group in the 3rd to 4th round is juicy. You should be getting at least one, if not two. If you draw that late 1st round pick, you're probably going running back, or running back tight end, or I even say running back Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes.
Yes.
But that's me. I wouldn't even say you're crazy if you say I'm taking Travis Kelce in the 1st and Lamar Jackson in the 2nd.
Right.
Or something like that. I don't think that's at all crazy this year. That 3rd, 4th round turn, I think now you're seeing Adam Thielen. I still say Odell Beckham. I mean, I'll go down with the ship with someone like Odell Beckham.
Sure.
You see these receivers available, DJ Moore. Receivers are available, Kenny Golladay, at the 3-4 turn. And it's maybe an easier exercise this year, Kyle, to say which ones am I taking out of the mix? Because I'm going to agonize when I'm on the clock. Let's take Juju out of the mix after having a lukewarm camp. Let's go and take Allen Robinson. As much as we love Allen Robinson, free Allen Robinson. We'll see where he ends up next year. But the Bears, you have to look at this as a team that's going to clean the deck. And are you also a Packers fan? Are you like Wisconsin?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So at least you've got that going for you as a Packers fan, is that the Bears are going to be sweeping the deck.
They make us feel better.
Yeah, and the Packers thing, that's the reality TV show
right.
of the season there. I don't know what they were thinking, Matt LaFleur, but
That's all I got. But so you were on the Action Network podcast. I don't know if you recorded that yesterday, but that was really cool. And I guess one of the quotes that I pulled from the beginning of the show was you guys said that getting your busts correct is almost more important than the hits. And then I immediately thought of the game of Chutes and Ladders and how your fantasy draft is kind of like navigating this Chutes and Ladders board. So you're trying to avoid the chutes. And so now it got me thinking of who are the ladders, and I think a lot of people kind of know what they're doing in the first 1 or 2 rounds. I think towards the back end of the second, that's when, the tight ends and the quarterbacks come into play. Yeah. For me, I've been hammering rounds 3 through 6 and 7, are the receiver rounds. So There's so many names to name off here. So I was just wondering who would you consider as like a ladder or someone that's going to help you shoot and win value in those positions or of the draft.
Early, you mean, or just in general?
It could be round, like we kind of already talked about the rounds the three guys with Thielen and Odell.
Right.
Sometimes
DJ
AJ Brown creeps into there.
AJ Brown's in that range. Yeah, there's so many.
But then guys like Tyler Lockett fall into the fourth, and that just feels like a slam dunk. And then even DK Metcalf, that's one of the positions. The Seahawk receiver is on my list. I want one.
And you can take both. That's not crazy. And we can even go a little bit further and talk about Devontae Parker and Tyler Boyd and Marquise Brown. And so, yes, you should go into your draft planning on taking wide receivers from the 3rd round to the 6th or 7th round. And if you're not taking one, that player better be compelling.
So who would be some of those compelling guys? Because I kind of
go ahead.
Well, James Conner is one lone running back in the 3rd that I like. But I think right now the most important thing that I'm working on is developing my tiers and seeing, okay, are these receivers more important than this running back? Because I mean, I like Kareem Hunt, I like Ronald Jones at a certain point, but I'm not taking Ronald Jones over DK Metcalf. Like there's way those names.
Exactly. Well, this is exactly why Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and George Kittle make more sense in the 2nd round than the running backs and wide receivers there. Because inside, you're doing this weighing test, a balancing test of how certain am I that this player is going to give me an advantage in my weekly lineups compared to the other players that I'm looking at. And when you're on the board, on the clock, from the 3rd round to the 7th round, chances are your 1st and maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th most likely impact players are all going to be wide receivers. So if you start wide receiver, or even if you take one wide receiver in your first 2 picks, that's going to make you less likely to take wide receivers during that stretch of your draft where, I just put out my wide receiver tiers a couple days ago, Kyle, and the wide receiver 2s don't look that much different than the wide receiver 3s. And the 2s don't look that different from the 1s either. We're talking about like Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, and Julio Jones. So, and even those guys, Adams is interesting. Although I think the lead that might be buried on Adams is, can he stay healthy? Can he stay healthy if he's getting 180 or 200 targets, which he probably will get? But can he stay healthy? Remember, he missed 4 games last year and admirably played through the toe issue for the rest of the year. So you want to be setting yourself up to take wide receivers. Other players that might be compelling enough to not take a wide receiver during that stretch. I mean, Cam Akers, I suppose, is interesting. You mentioned Kareem Hunt. Jonathan Taylor. I'm not going to talk anyone out of taking Jonathan Taylor in the 3rd or 4th round. Taking Jonathan Taylor is the kind of thing that makes fantasy football fun because you're sticking your neck out in some sense. But talk about drum beats, where we started. The drum beat is deafening for Jonathan Taylor, and it's even coming from the coaches because I don't know how many people out there obsessed to the point of parsing coach quotes. But let me tell you, 20 years ago, if you were an avid fantasy football player, that's all you had.
That was the Bible,
That was it, the coach quotes, and maybe somebody went to training camp and did a detailed report and posted it on the message board or something like that. But if you read between the lines of the quotes, or even go back to Marlon Mack's interview last week, they're all setting it up for Jonathan Taylor to take over quickly.
Mack's body language and just the way he carried himself in that interview was kind of alarming to me.
Well, he just knows what's happening. I mean, there's Matt, and poor Marlon Mack has improved every year of his career, and he's been a great 4th round pick. What'd you say?
I was going to say, let's get him to the Bears. I mean, there's a lot of even Gus Edwards. There's some guys that are kind of backed up behind good, other good backs that we need to free them.
Absolutely, Jalen Samuels. I'll add to that. So Jonathan Taylor could be Derrick Henry light this year, because he's going to get a chance to close out wins. He's in a perfect running game for his style. He's got a great offensive line in front of him. The Colts are another team low key. I know Phillip Rivers can't push the ball down the field anymore, but he makes smart decisions. He sees the ball clearly. Sees the field clearly, and he understands everything he's working with. He understands all the moving pieces.
He's going to keep that offense on track, that kind of like how Jacoby Brissett couldn't do. He kind of started doing that well, but it kind of unraveled, whereas Phillip Rivers is just going to be super calm and steady, and he's just going to get the ball into the playmaker's hands pretty quickly. So I'm super into the Colts, and I think you need to probably plan for one or the 2 pieces there.
Yes, and Jonathan Taylor could be that guy because if they're an 11, 12, 13 win team, which they can be, then he's going to be closing out those games against players that are just tired of tackling him. The same thing that happened with Derrick Henry in wins last year.
Right.
So that I'm if you say I'm taking Jonathan Taylor in the 3rd round and you can't talk me out of it, I'm going to say I'm not going to try to do it.
Right.
5th, 6th, 7th round, I don't even know. I don't think there's a tight end. I mean, Evan Ingram, if he could stay healthy. But again, we have that rough start for him. Dak Prescott, we mentioned Dak Prescott. If there's a quarterback worth taking in that area of the draft, it's Dak Prescott. Go ahead.
I was going to say, are you into, because like for tight ends, Mark Andrews and Zach Ertz, if I don't get Kittle, I don't get Kelsey, I think about Mark Andrews and Ertz. But again, it's those like Andrews and Ertz are going in that receiver range that I love so much. So sometimes if like I'll watch the board and if Ertz falls to the end of the 4th, that's when I really have to think about doing it. But I'm struggling to figure out, do I want to take one of these tight ends early? Because I like the Herndons, I like the Jonnu Smiths, I like the Blake Darwins late. So I don't really know if tight end's a priority in the 3rd or 4th round for me.
Exactly. Well, and you can really play this either way, because you can say there's the Jarwin, Jonnu Smith, Irv Smith, that tier, Herndon, and so on. But you can also say, hey, I can get Randall Cobb for free. I can get Leviska Chanal for free.
Steven Sims.
Right. I can get these guys for free. So you can play it either way. And certainly if you like to do a bunch of best ball drafts, you can try a bunch of different combinations to see how it works out. On Ertz, I would say I'm still interested in him in your tight end premium leagues, in your 1.5 PPR leagues, because he's still going to lead the team in targets and catches. And as much as we have all these plans of Jalen Reagor and Deshaun Jackson and Arcega-Whiteside's on his redemption tour, we'll see how it actually works out.
I was going to say, he's got a little bit of drumbeat the last couple of days.
Well, again, if you wanted to see, and even N'Keal Harry to a slight extent.
Yeah, he had the one day.
N'Keal Harry is interesting, if only because we know if Cam Newton can make Kelvin Benjamin fantasy relevant, then I'll give him a chance to make Harry relevant, And then with Arcega-Whiteside, again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you were a believer in him having a bounce back second year, this is what you wanted to hear. During his second year. But Kyle, this is one of those things that's like, okay, this is the plan, but let's check in with the Eagles receivers by like week 8.
Yeah, it could be destroyed by then.
And then there's still Zach Ertz there. So I think in league scoring that values volume for a tight end, Ertz is more interesting. Andrews is certainly interesting on the same theory as Jarwin, that Hayden Hurst is gone, and Hayden Hurst is interesting. Hayden Hurst you probably don't have to take until the 8th and 9th round. So in between the early tight ends and the late tight ends, there is Hayden Hurst, and maybe Tyler Higbee. Cooling on Higbee a little bit.
I'm into Higbee. I think people are sleeping on
him. I am too.
Derek Goff, like he's probably not going to forget what Tyler Higbee did for him down the stretch.
I agree. I love that.
He was his go-to receiver pretty much. That just opened, and everything kind of ran off of that. Like everything that Higbee was doing allowed Kupp and Woods to do what they succeeded at. Yes. So I don't think Higbee's going away. He's not going to be at that clip of 20 fantasy points per game, but he's going to get 6-7 targets per game, and he could capitalize with 4 or 5 of those catches. So I'm open
to him. Yeah, I'm open to him. I'm open to him and Hurst if you're going in those middle rounds. Hurst is going to get that role that Austin Hooper turned in to some great fantasy love. And in the wake of Hurst leaving, we want to see Mark Andrews, with how efficient he was, like even just get up to like 20 or 30 more targets. My worries about Mark Andrews, it's sort of similar to the Darren Waller profile, where as great as Mark Andrews was last year, how much who else is Lamar Jackson going to throw to? Now you've got a healthy Boykin, you've got a healthy Marquise Brown, love Devin Duvernay. And the margin of error for Andrews. So if you take a tight end in the top 4, Kyle,
they better finish as a top 4 tight end.
Well, and not just finish as a top 4 tight end, but help your team every week.
Changer week to week, yeah.
And the thing is, if you take Mark Andrews, unless he gets a target spike, I mean, look, the scenario where you're happy to take Mark Andrews is where by the end of the year he has like 13, 14 touchdowns, 100,000 yards, and is on a par with Kelsey and Kittle when it comes to bottom line production. Because looking at last year, if things don't change greatly, then you're looking at some weeks where you get like 2 for 20 out of one of your cornerstone players. You're telling me I'm passing on Odell Beckham to take a 2 for 20 like 4 weeks at tight end? I don't think so. And then the other thing about Andrews is he was on the injury report a lot last year.
Yeah.
What was his snap count last year, Kyle? Like 40% of the snaps or something?
It was less than 50. I know that for sure. And then the one that stays on the field is Nick Boyle. So he's kind of the guy that I filed away in my first couple weeks of the year. We see what happens, and if he's going to be on the field. So I don't know. I just file Nick Boyle's name away.
Is it good if Mark Andrews gets a big bump in snaps? Is that necessarily good for him if he's on the injury report every week as it was, playing less than half of the snaps? I don't know.
That's a good point.
Maybe we want to keep him in bubble wrap, like what Tampa's going to do with Rob Gronkowski. So that's my take on those two tight ends. But I would say this. It feels a lot better to take Kelsey and especially Kittle at their ADP than it does to take Ertz and Andrews at their ADP.
It's such a stronger feeling taking one of those two guys. And then with all the 49ers injuries at receivers right now, like everything's going off in my head like pinball machines for George Kittle.
Career year, right? Like everything's ramped up. I mean, I almost feel like this is where fantasy football really messes with your head, right? Because if I'm on the board and no tight ends have been taken at the second round, and I'm not, this isn't a draft where I'm going to take Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, I'm probably going to take Kelsey. Like, on principle, you have to take Kelsey as the number one tight end. But everything is pointing towards Kittle passing Kelsey this year. On a per-game basis, Kittle was Kelsey's equal. He just had that injury last year. Then you add in, like you said, the injuries. And here's the other thing. Kelsey's going to be 31 in October. And, man, he's had a lot of injuries and surgeries. One of these years, much like with Gronk, it's going to catch up with him. Kittle's turning 27. Kittle's at this prime right now. And it sure feels like Kittle's going to pass him.
And for one thing that I like to look at is touchdown regression. And Kittle's never had more than 5 touchdowns in a season. He's getting more than 5 touchdowns this year. So, I feel really good about him flirting with 1,000 yards. He's going to be over that probably. He's going to get over 80 catches. And then he's probably going to score upwards 6, 7, 8 touchdowns at least. So everything just feels really good there. And then I'm trying to think any other tight end thoughts, but we got a few more minutes left here. I really wanted to get some Carolina Panthers offense talking stuff, because I think that's an offense that a lot of people they could really win their draft with if everything goes right. I know everything's new with the offensive coordinator, the new coach, new quarterback, new extra wide receiver, Robbie Anderson. There's so many moving pieces. But why am I feeling that Teddy Bridgewater could be a part of your super flex plans or as your streaming plans?
Yep.
And Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel could be flex worthy. Robbie Anderson has some moments, and then Ian Thomas too. Mm-hmm. I love everything about this offense.
Why you're feeling that, Kyle, is because you're a thoughtful person who has good judgment. What do we like here? We like Teddy Bridgewater. Did you see, by the way, that Bridgewater admitted that when he got on the field at first, he wasn't ready? He's like, I just wasn't ready. I wasn't really ready for a couple of weeks. And then when I got ready, you saw it. And the Saints were as good of a team with Bridgewater as they were with Breeze.
There was no drop-off, yeah.
My wife, who, living down here in New Orleans, she's a diehard Saints fan. When I laid out everything for her about the choices for the Saints this offseason, she's like, well, they're going to keep Teddy, right? Breeze is old. We
want Teddy. We want him, yeah.
No, I was like, nah, Breeze is just – with a player like Breeze, he's going to be on the team until he retires. Bridgewater's good. Bridgewater's also aligned with Joe Brady, who made the LSU offense one of the best college offenses of all time last year.
The most exciting offense I've watched in a while for college.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And Brady has worked with Bridgewater with the Saints. And so here's your continuity. And bringing in Robbie Anderson, in addition to being a connection back to Matt Rule from their times in Temple, I think it's a statement of purpose for this offense. We're going to be aggressive.
Yeah, we know what we're going to do, and we're excited to push the ball downfield.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, Teddy Bridgewater, pushing the ball downfield means like 20, 30 yards, okay?
Yeah.
So, and then look, Robbie Anderson again. Robbie Anderson is so good that if you take Robbie Anderson in the 15th, 16th round, I'm not going to say that's a bad move. Mm-hmm. I do think you're looking at a role for Anderson more like Sammy Watkins' role with the Rams, where he's canceling out the best cornerback outside and allowing the offense to have room to operate elsewhere. But still, Robbie Anderson could be just fine because
he only needs one play to win. That's kind of his whole thing.
And Teddy Bridgewater hooked up to Devontae Parker back at Louisville pretty well in a similar sort of role. And when we think about Bridgewater, I want to wax rhapsodic about Bridgewater for a while because I just love Bridgewater as a person. But keep in mind, when Bridgewater got on the field last year, it was his first meaningful football in what, Kyle, like 4 years?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. It's almost unprecedented, And he was good. And with Bridgewater, it's the decision-making. It's, again, the competitive toughness, the accuracy. So if Joe Brady sets him up with these kind of decision trees, he's going to be good at navigating those decision trees. So you have McCaffrey number one, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Love Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel. So if we were going to make a list, Kyle, of players who played well enough to get X fantasy points, but were dragged down by their situation, Curtis Samuel was top of that list.
He's the poster boy of that.
Yeah, he was getting open at will. Just didn't have a quarterback, or for that matter, an offense. Because finally, in the last 4 weeks, when Scott Turner, who's now with Washington, keep this in mind if you like Antonio Gibson, Scott Turner in the last 4 games gave Samuel 9 of the 19 touches he got as a runner in the last 4 games once he took over play calling from his dad. So that's good for Antonio Brown. And then you see a new offense that I think has the mentality to say, Curtis Samuel's a special talent. We're going to figure out ways, just like we talked about with Leviska Chanal. So that's a good thing for Samuel. You mentioned Ian Thomas was tremendous as a rookie. You know, we talk about Blake Jarwin as maybe the 5th option in Dallas, but that offense is so special, it could elevate the 5th option to be fantasy relevant. Could that happen with Ian Thomas? I mean, I'm open to it. Again, this is what we talk about. It's being ready, like Quintez Cephas. Just know what's happening so you're ready. You also have Carolina being one of the worst teams in the league. They're going to have a lot of pass-heavy game scripts.
The NFC South is nuts, man. They're going to be behind in almost all those games.
Yeah. So I think you absolutely want a slice of this offense in some way, and you want to be open to it being one of the most. Look what Kyle Allen did in this offense last year. You know, there's another reason to like Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims, by the way, is with Scott Turner there. Washington's going to throw more than they did.
Washington looks like a different, like it's Carolina just in a different city almost.
Right.
Just the way they have their players and the tools that they're going to be using them. I'm open to Washington having a couple guys that we use for fantasy, and we probably got to throw in Logan Thomas's name at some point just to get him out there.
Absolutely. So we want to go super late at and I'll have to say I bid you adieu after this. Sorry, I got carried away. Logan Thomas, former tight end, very natural, very athletic as a receiver, and going to be the number 1 tight end. So you have to like his chances. Him and Dan Arnold are your 2 tight ends to watch as potential waiver wire pickups in the first month of the season.
Okay. And I'm sure you got to be getting out of here soon. I just wanted to finish up and just say, in that other podcast that you recorded the other day, you guys were talking about the idea of the second draft and just names to keep an eye on for like the first couple of weeks. So you already said Dan Arnold, Logan Thomas. Is there any other names that you think you could be like a hot pickup, with the first couple of weeks?
I mean, it depends on whether these players are getting drafted.
Sure.
Alan Lazard is a name to watch in Green Bay. At running back, if guys like Jerick McKinnon and LaShawn McCoy weren't drafted, they could have pretty big roles as receiving running backs to open up the season. At quarterback, we mentioned Tyrod Taylor and Teddy Bridgewater. Drew Lock could be another one, depending on whether he gets drafted. Tennessee and Denver could be a great week 1 tilt there. At wide receiver, again, some of these guys probably aren't going drafted. Steven Sims, Randall Cobb, I think is one to watch. Auden Tate, we've talked about. So you just found the theme of the show.
Yes. So is there any other final thoughts on things before we wrap up the show?
The final thoughts are just, it's great to be part of the fellowship with you and everything that y'all are doing over there. The fellowship to me stands for, I understand this year we all got a lot going on. Fantasy football might not be the most important thing on our mind. Football might not be the most important thing on our mind compared to years past. And for those that are listening, that are still paying attention, that are still enjoying the distraction, the release that it offers, we're all still here enjoying it. Our safe space on Twitter where we're actually nice to each other and enjoy each other's company is still there, and I'm glad I get to share it with people like you.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Fantasy football is like the first thing about that is I think it's a social thing. It keeps people talking to friends that they don't see, and it just connects people. So that's probably my favorite thing about fantasy football is it's allowed friendships and other things to grow, and just more connections, more talk, and more conversation. So I don't know. I'm super thankful though to have you on the show. I'll wrap it up with that. And thank you for so much of your time. And we'll see you in another video. Peace.